What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Indie Inkwell. My name is JJ. I'm one of your two co-hosts. And this week, we are graced with the presence of my co-host, Longbox, aka Michael. What is going on, man?
The prodigal co-host has returned.
About time, the
I
damn
am
Air
here.
Force keeps taking you away from us all the time.
I
One of
know,
these days,
man.
they're going to see one of these and they're going to be like, we need to talk to that kid.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Trust me, the views of this channel do not represent the United States Air Force or the government.
Cover those bases real quick.
Yes. But yeah, good to be here, man. Like I said, I did have a couple times I couldn't make it due to like training and whatnot, but I'm glad to be here as always.
Indeed. And we've got a special guest. I'd say they're special. I might be a little biased because they're kind of like a home state guy. So everybody, please welcome Ryan Drost. I did pronounce that correctly. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, you did. Thanks for having me. Yeah, the second I found out you were a fellow Ohio person, I was like, oh, we're going to get along just great.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Like I said, I might be biased because you're from my home state, but I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing.
No, a lot of great talent comes out of Ohio, so
really does. But before we get into the books and the art and all that fun stuff, let's get into your origin story, kind of how you got introduced to comic books as like maybe a kid, or if you didn't, maybe as an adult, if that was your first introduction to them, kind of what got you started on this whole path.
Yeah, so I as a kid, I started off as like a huge Star Wars fan. I still am a huge Star Wars fan. And so like my very first comic book was, I don't know if you remember, they used to do like 3-packs at like toy stores and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was Return of the Jedi #1 was in that 3-pack. I don't remember what else was in that 3-pack, but I remember Return of the Jedi. I can see the cover as plain as day. And there's the whole Jabba the Hutt scene, which is still my favorite scene in all of Star Wars, is the whole Jabba the Hutt beginning of Return of the Jedi. So that was the first comic. And then I'd get a few sporadically until I was like old enough to ride my bike up to the comic shop myself.
Right.
And then I could like mow lawns. I was old enough to mow lawns and earn some money to go buy comics. And I've told this story a few times in my past. And I don't know why I keep telling it, because it does not highlight me in a very intelligent way. But I would ride my bike up to this comic shop near me called LA Comics. Mm-hmm. And in my mind as a little kid, I'm thinking like, oh, these are comics from the West Coast. These are comics I wouldn't get over here normally. And it was probably like the store owner was probably like named Larry Anderson or something like that. It wasn't it had nothing to do with Los Angeles. So I would ride my bike up there, and that's where I started like collecting like X-Men and Spider-Man and Green Lantern and just all these characters I grew up watching, like Super Friends and like the 90s X-Men cartoon and things like that. So that's when the obsession started. That's when it was like, okay. And then I could drive, and I could fit even more comics in the car. So
once you start getting adult money, it gets real bad real quick.
Oh yeah, very, very bad. So I got heavy into DC around the time of 0 Hour, because I heard that was a good time to jump on. I think what they meant was a good time to jump on after 0 Hour with all the Zero issues, because 0 Hour itself was very confusing for someone that had not been reading a lot of DC before that.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's even confusing when you have. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then, so I remember going and asking the shop owner, I'm like, I don't really know. It's a good story, but I don't really know like a lot of the history behind a lot of the stuff that's happening. He's like, oh, you should read Crisis on Infinite Earth, and that'll help you out. And I read Crisis on Infinite Earth, and that was also very confusing for someone that didn't have a lot of DC knowledge.
I was going to say, you failed to mention the, like, I don't know, 10 years of backstory leading up to those books.
Right. Now, the good thing was I loved that story, and I still love 0 Hour because it was one of my first dives into stuff. But I love Crisis on Infinite Earth, and to this day, that's like my favorite comic book story of all time. And it caused me to want to read more. And then on the Marvel side of things, it was around the time of reading like Age of Apocalypse came out. So I dove into that, and that was amazing. So then like you said, the obsession just continued. So I collected a ton of comics over the years, went to college, then couldn't afford comics at all, then got out of college. And the first thing that I got was I went into a comic shop. I went to school in Toledo, and I stopped at the comic shop on the way home. and there was that's right when Batman No Man's Land was going on, and he had it all. So all I saw was yellow and black, all across all the Batman titles on the rack there. Grabbed every single one of them, read that story. It's phenomenal. So did that, and then fast forward some years later, and working with some buddies and talking about, like, we were talking about comics and everything else, and my one buddy's just like, hey, do you know about podcasts and stuff like that? There's like some good ones out there. And I was like, no. So I started listening to them. And then that same buddy turned to me, he's like, we could probably do a podcast. And I was like, yeah, we probably could. And I'm someone like, I'm happy to jump into something new. So
right, just something to do, keep you busy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I reached out to a few that I had been listening to faithfully and had interacted with, and was just like, how do we do this? How do you go about it? And 14 years later, I'm still doing that podcast. But that one's called Star Joe's, and it's I grew up in the 1980s, so it's like all the loves of like G.I. Joe, Transformers, Star Wars, all that stuff I grew up with during that time period. Got to interview some amazing creators. Some of them now are like close friends of mine. So that was really cool. So then, a few years ago, I was like, we'll get into like the origin of Stealth Hammer, but basically I was like, hey, I want to do a comic. Can you guys help me to figure out how to do this? so it helps with some networking there as well. So
right.
I like that. I like that.
So did you have any like characters? I know you said you got pretty obsessed with Batman there for a minute. Yeah. So was that like that was your guy, or did you have some other characters?
My guy has always been Hal Jordan, Green Lantern.
Okay.
From like Super Friends days, when everyone else wanted to be Superman and Batman, I wanted to be the guy with the ring that can make anything his imagination could come up with. So
I mean, it's a pretty cool power, especially when you're a kid. Like, I can make anything I want. Are you serious?
Yeah. And then, so then I went, and I remember one of the first comics I got with him, and it was Ganthet's Tale, which is the original graphic novel with him. And that was amazing. And I just kept reading him. And like, as I learned more about like the mythos, the more I loved the character even more. It was like, okay, he can overcome fear. He can, all this type of stuff. So it was just, And then of course you get the legendary Jeff Johns run. And it's just like, okay.
Yeah,
I got the
Jeff Johns
back here.
Yeah, I saw him.
Yeah, that's my favorite Green Lantern run, the Jeff Johns.
Yeah, for sure. So and I've been reading him ever since. So, but that's my go-to guy.
Okay. I do have one question before we get into your book.
Yeah.
And I might already know the answer, the way how you told the story, but what's your favorite Star Wars movie?
My favorite Star Wars movie is Return of the Jedi.
I figured.
Yeah, a quick story with that was I was not old enough to see the A New Hope in theaters when it was just still called Star Wars. Right. I was like, I think 1 at the time. But I found out later, I actually found out my 40th birthday, I was telling my dad some memories because I remembered him taking me to go see Star Wars. And I thought it was Empire Strikes Back, which was in 1980. And I would have been like 4 or 5 years old. And he goes, no, he said, I took you to go see the first Star Wars movie because there was a re-release in 1979 at a local theater right before Empire Strikes Back came out. And that's the movie I took you to go see. Because I was telling him my memories, and here I thought all along these memories were of Empire Strikes Back, and they weren't. They were of Star Wars, like stuff that happened at the theater and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
Because there was people dressed up as there was someone dressed up as Darth Vader. There was people dressed up as stormtroopers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think Star Wars and Star Trek fans were the original cosplayers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
at least the modern versions that we think of.
Yeah. But then Return of the Jedi comes out, and I'm 8 years old. Like, that's prime time to be watching. And so, like, that's the one that's always ingrained in my head. So,
that's awesome. Actually, Return of the Jedi is like one of my favorites, and I think it was one of the like anniversaries, and like I remember the movie theaters was like replaying it.
Yeah.
And that was my first time seeing Return of the Jedi like in theaters, right?
Oh yeah.
And like, man, it felt good. I felt like I was like back in the 80s or something.
Oh
It was like
yeah,
taking a trip back in time. And
I love going to movies that are like reshowings of real old classic
yeah,
ones
yeah,
because it is you go in and you feel like you're a little kid again
yeah. I
watching
was in
those movies.
Yeah, I was in college when they did the special editions and they released those in the theaters, and I was
Yeah.
there opening night of every single one. It was it was awesome.
yeah.
That's
That's
so
awesome. That's
sweet,
awesome.
dude. So with going into kind of how the origin story of the book started, how did you decide that I want to start making my own books? You said you were doing that podcast for like probably what 13, 14 years by the time
Yeah,
you
yeah, like
decided you
12,
wanted to make
13.
your
Yeah,
own book.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
what
Like
made that switch finally click? Like I don't want to just talk about them anymore. Now I want to make them too.
yeah. So I mean, even as a little kid, I was always a storyteller, and it took me becoming an adult to look back at that and go, "Oh, wait, yeah, I've been doing this since I was a kid." Like I would have like GI Joe creating the Transformers to battle the Cobra forces, and then I'd have like this relic come up from the ground that was at Castle Grayskull. So I was always like intermingling
For
stories
you
and stuff.
tablet kids, what he's talking about is playing with toys.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I lived on the main road.
Imagination, you know?
Right. Oh yeah, you give me a stick, I was good for days.
Oh
That's
yeah.
80s and 90s kids, man.
That
To the
that stick would be
fullest.
everything, man. It's a
Right.
sword. It's a
Right.
rifle. It's everything.
Right, exactly. So, but yeah, it was like I lived on a main road, so there was not a whole lot of going out and playing with the kids in the street. So
Right.
it was just my sister and I, and we had a really cool big backyard, and like I would just, I would come up with, imaginary things going on, and like you said, play with my toys and come up with all these stories and everything else. And so that's kind of where it started, and it was always there. But then years ahead, my wife, who is actually Stealth Hammer, is actually the nickname of my wife. So that's where the name came from.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
okay. Okay.
So I'll explain that quickly for you. So she's a graphic designer, and she worked at an ad agency, and the boss had submitted some ideas to clients. And she's like, "Well, can I submit an idea? I have an idea." And she's like, "Yeah, go ahead." So she submitted an idea, and the client chose hers out of all the ones her boss did. And so the next time he sent out a request for ideas from people, he's like, "Watch out for Stealth." And so that became her nickname for a little while, which is a pretty cool nickname.
Because
That
nobody
is
knew she
cool.
was gonna come out of nowhere and
Exactly,
Uh,
exactly,
steal the client, basically.
exactly.
that's
So
cool.
yeah, so then she worked at another place where she was in charge of brand compliance. So she had to, she was the one that had to kind of like say, okay, you have to use this font, and you have to use like this color and stuff like that. So her boss is like, "You're the one that kind of has to lay the hammer down, so I'm going to call you Hammer." And she's like, "Well, I already have a nickname of Stealth." So then it just became Stealth Hammer. She put the two
That's
together.
awesome, though.
Yeah.
That's probably
That's
the
awesome.
coolest nickname you could ever get.
Right.
Like
Right. So then we were always saying like, "Oh, that'd make a cool superhero name." And we would talk about like what would her powers be and things like that. And then for one of her birthdays, we went down a trip down to Florida, and I previous to that had gotten a commission done from her of her as a superhero at Baltimore Comic Con, and like brought a
Ah.
picture of her and was like, "Hey, I found an artist I really liked."
I
And
think is that the picture on your website?
yes. So I was
Okay,
just going to
so I
mention that.
actually
Yeah.
pulled that from the website so people
Yes.
could here's the photo he's talking about. For our
Yeah.
audio listeners, you'll have to go over to YouTube, but
And that's a pretty good
That's cool.
that's a pretty good likeness of my wife too. So
that's
um
awesome.
yeah, so
Awesome,
he
man.
drew her. I was like, I want her fists up because she went to Notre Dame, so I wanted the
The
fighting
Fighting
Irish
Irish thing, yeah,
pose,
yeah.
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 So yeah, so I drew that. I had him draw that for, and then I took that with me down on the trip and gave that to her down there, and she absolutely loved it. And she was like, "This is awesome." Well, once I saw it in physical form, I was like, "Okay, maybe this whole thing that we've been joking about, maybe
Can
this
actually
actually
be a
be
thing.
something,
Yeah.
right?"
It's I mean, because that's a really good, like,
Yeah,
that's
That
a
is.
very good character mock-up right there,
yeah,
like a first draft of a
Yeah.
new character or
yeah,
something, like
yeah. So so as soon as I thought that, so I relate this to a story I've always heard, which is in it's always believed that Paul McCartney, when he woke up one day, he had the song "Yesterday" stuck in his head, and he wrote it out in like 15 minutes. That's at least the story that I've heard before.
right.
Mhm.
So it was kind of like that. like, I'm not comparing myself to Paul McCartney. He's a legend.
No,
But
just using that as like an
but
example.
Yeah.
but it was like, it was one of those things. I was in a shopping plaza, and the second I thought, okay, maybe we should do something, like the ideas could not come out of my brain fast enough. I was like typing it up and like just like I was on my phone, like putting little ideas down and everything else. And everything I wrote down that day, except for one little thing, made it into the comic.
Oh,
So
wow.
That's awesome.
yeah.
That's awesome. That
And, yeah. And the one little thing was like, I thought it'd be cool if she had like a chameleon pet. And I was like, that's a little too much.
I mean, I like the dog personally.
Oh,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
That's me.
So the dog, so there's a lot of history behind a lot of the characters and everything else. So the dog, her name is Hana, was actually our real life dog that we had. She passed away a few years ago. And I thought to immortalize her, I would put her in the comic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Like, now that you like explaining all of this, like the fact that Jamie, who's the main character for our listeners, she actually is going to school for graphic design.
Yes.
And the fact that you're saying that, like, oh, your wife is a graphic designer, that's just so cool, man.
Yeah. So, and that helped develop some of the other characters. So it was one of those things, like, I am not, so I want to clarify too for people, like, I am not a fan of self-insert characters. Like, I don't like it when someone just like puts themselves in there and it totally like messes with the story or anything like that. But I do believe, and I've talked to a lot of writers, you do get inspiration from actual people and places that you know.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And yeah, so like, while this character is inspired by my wife, there's definitely some differences. However, I thought, okay, well, I'll make her go to school for graphic design. But then that helped me determine, like, well, who are her parents going to be? And that's where Dr. Everett came from, which is her dad. And I was like, okay, if there was a daughter who kind of like not only got the genes, but got the skills and abilities of her parents, what combination would make a graphic designer? I'm like, okay, maybe a scientific like inventor type that uses technology. And then her mom is this world traveling interior designer. So you put those two things together, you kind of get a graphic designer out of it. So
see it, yeah.
No, it makes 100% sense.
World travel, yeah.
So being from Cleveland, right? I want to ask you, because Ohio has kind of a reputation for being a little addicted to horror. So what gave you the confidence, being from Ohio, to not do a horror book? Because I swear to God, 90% of the books I get sent from Ohio writers and artists are horror books. Nothing against horror.
No, I love that stuff, but yeah.
There does get a point where it's like, it almost feels like that's all people want to make from here.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I have an idea for a horror story, as most Ohio people do.
We're one of the most haunted states in the country, so I get it on that level, but it's like, oh, this was like a breath of fresh air. It's like, most people around here do mature all horror books.
Yeah.
This is all ages superhero. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Something a little different.
Yeah. So I really wanted to tap into my 80s roots. So I wanted to tap into those stories I grew up with and enjoyed. So like, when I say all ages, I mean truly all ages. Like, I've had an 8-year-old read it, and I've had a 95-year-old read it, and everywhere in between. So
I'm in my 30s, he's in his 20s. We both enjoyed it. So
yeah. So it's like that was the type of story. I didn't want to write something just specifically for kids, but I wanted something that kids could pick up and read and enjoy. But I grew up, like, one of my heroes is Jim Henson. Like, he created some amazing stuff, but he didn't shy away from being a little dark at times, like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and all that type of stuff. It's like,
I would say Labyrinth gave me nightmares as a child. As a small child, I could not watch that scene where all the little monsters are juggling each other's heads. Freaked me out as a little kid, man.
So there's a character in the story you guys read named Marzana, and she's the Polish deity of death. And I, had her drawn, and I gave ideas of what I wanted her to look like and everything. And my wife saw it, and she's like, that's kind of creepy. Aren't you doing an all ages comic? And I go, yeah, it's all ages, but it's like the all ages I grew up with. It's okay if the kid has a little bit of nightmares because the character looks creepy. We're just not doing blood and gore and all that type of stuff.
Right. Because people forget how like mature the kids movies were back in the day. Like, especially like the animated movies from like MGM and all those places.
Oh yeah, like Watership Down and
Oh yeah,
Secret of Nim and stuff like that. Like
Secret of Nim was so dark.
yes,
So dark
and
and
I
so
loved
depressing. Like, oh
it.
my gosh. Like the fact that that was marketed as a kids movie.
Right, right. But so I tapped into a lot of that 80s stuff with this, and it was like I also loved stuff like He-Man and Thunder the Barbarian, where you had like technology and sorcery and mythology like all blended together. So I want
Thundercats and
yeah, Thundercats.
Thundercats.
So I wanted to do something like that too. So I loved like the games like Mega Man and stuff like that. So I always relate this to being like she's set in a world of Mega Man meets Jim Henson's Creature Shop. Like that's the type of world she's in. So the
great sales pitch.
yeah, so like the technology doesn't make any sense. You guys saw the one car where like the arms are coming out. There's no way those arms fit in that car, but that's okay. We're having fun.
To.
Right.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
That now that you explain it, like with the whole like 80s like cartoons or whatnot,
Yeah.
that gave me the vibe of like, I swear I've seen something like this in like Inspector Gadget or something.
Yeah.
I don't know, you know,
Yeah.
Either Inspector Gadget or I mean, there's all kinds of movies like that back then where just like random stuff would happen that makes absolutely no sense physically or scientifically, but there it is. Like,
and as long as I'm following my own rules in my own world, we're good. So
yes, yes, as long as the no rules that you're following is consistent throughout, you're good.
Right.
Yes.
But I also love world mythologies. So like that was a big thing for me. Like I love learning about mythology from any country, any region and stuff like that. So I started tapping into that. I like was reading, I have tons of books about mythology. So I was reading that. I was watching YouTube videos about different creatures and characters and all that type of stuff. So I started pulling in some of those things. That's where Marzana came from. Marzana is really funny though, because where she came from was I was watching Mystery Science Theater 3000. And they were doing a song about mythological characters around the world. And I heard the name Marzana and I was like, I've never heard that name before. And I Googled it really quick and I was like, this is really cool. I might be able to use this. And so that's where that one came from.
I love it.
That's dope.
But then I got to tap into my wife had a big birthday a few years back, and we got to go to Iceland for an amazing trip. And it was probably the best vacation I've ever been in my life. And the people are wonderful there. It is just like, if you ever have a chance, as long as the volcano isn't active, you should absolutely go there.
I'm like, we'll wait a while, let them, clean up.
But it's like they
figure out what the hell's going on.
Right, exactly. But we got there. We went there in 2019, so just before the pandemic. And the people there, 95% of them speak English. You drive on the right side of the road. It's just like there's no adjustment whatsoever.
It's just a really cold version of here.
Right. Except there's places there that don't even look like you're on the same planet anymore.
Right.
I mean, it's just amazing. So while we were there, they have like some people have a belief in elves over there. Mm-hmm. And that's where I picked up this guy, which ended up turning into Ari the elf in the story.
Ari.
Yeah.
Ari was a lot of fun.
I like Ari.
Gnome boy.
Oh, we've lost your audio. We've lost your audio, Ryan. Bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. We're experiencing technical difficulties here. Yeah, no audio, my friend. I don't know what's going on.
I had this happen once before.
Oh, there it goes.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, nope. It went out again.
Went out again.
All right. We're going to go. How about that?
There we go.
Okay. I'm going to go just with the built-in microphone. I had an external mic and it's just being temperamental. So.
I understand that pain, trust me.
So basically, so with Ari the elf is my favorite character to write because he's just snarky, he's fun, he has his own language, kind of like my Yoda character. So there's a lot of fun to write that. But yeah, so he came from Iceland, and then we have the goddess Aurora, who people learn more about in this issue. We were watching stuff about the Aurora Borealis while we were there, and they were like, the goddess Aurora, and I was like, ooh, I like that. Let me pull from that. So there's a lot of things just from life that I kind of pulled inspiration from.
No, that's awesome. So
I really like Ari. Ari was like, he was Yoda. He reminded me of freaking, I don't know, Orko from He-Man. He reminded me of
That's the
like
character I was trying to
like
think of earlier today. I'm like, I know like there's
like I was like, oh, I love this character. Like I don't know, it kind of made me kind of giddy. Like I felt like a kid again.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
today, I felt like a kid. It was
Well,
like
then you're gonna love the third issue because it is very Ari the Elf centric.
yes.
yes.
So for people who don't know any context of what the hell we're
Yes.
talking about,
Yeah.
why don't we
Yeah.
give them a quick synopsis if you could,
Sounds good.
Ryan?
Yeah, sounds good. So, like I mentioned, Stealth Hammer, the elevator pitch is it's a superhero adventure story that takes place in a world of high tech gadgetry and supernatural mythology. So, in the first issue, we learn her origin. It's kind of a throwback to a Golden Age type story. Like the hero gets her powers, she gets her costume, all that type of stuff, and then she goes and fights the bad guy. End of story. But we did insert some things. So you're showing one thing there is the first page there is one of my favorite pages.
I love that first page.
So here's the thing with that. So sometimes I write to Joel, my artist, and we'll talk about the creative team a little bit. And I'll write like just a couple lines and he will draw something crazy like that. This, however, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff because everything in this scene means something at some point in the story down the line. So I want people to be able to look back when they're reading this and go, oh my God, that was in issue 1 on page 1. It was in her room, and so stuff like that. So
I'll leave this up for an extra second or two.
Yeah.
Make sure people can.
Yeah. So like to give you an example is there's a sword in the upper right there.
Yeah.
And if you notice in issue 2 on the cover of issue 2, there's someone holding that sword, and that is what that sword is. And we actually see it in the double page spread in issue 2 as well.
The knight.
Yep. Yeah.
I was gonna say because it felt like the first scene in her room, she's kind of just telling you what's already happened. So a lot of this story is like her explaining how she got to where she's at already.
Exactly.
So like a lot of those things in her room are basically like trophies.
Yes, exactly.
You know what's crazy? I was thinking, like, once I got to that first page, I was like, oh my gosh, this character is already relatable. She has comic books on her bed.
Yes.
So I was thinking, and then I looked and I was like, oh, she has like, I'm just thinking they're like, oh, collectibles or something. I don't know, right?
But that's what it looks like. It looks like a nerd's room. It looks like
it
it's
looks like
got helmets and masks on the shelf.
Yeah.
It's got books everywhere. Yeah.
And we were going for that, but yeah, that's her bat cave basically. Like that, she's got those trophies in there and everything else, and they're going to mean something at some point. The comic books that you see on the bed are actually like one shots that my artist Joel Jackson had worked on in the past. So he actually just threw them in there on the bed.
I was like, because one of them I've seen the cover of before.
Yeah.
So
those are ones he's worked on before. But we have her costumes actually laying on the chair. We have a book that's sitting on her desk, and that's not the book that you see in issue 2. We want to make it seem like it is, but it's not. And then you see the sword. There's stuff on the bookshelves. You see Watts the robot in the corner, kind of busted up, but you don't know what any of that stuff is until you're like starting to read. The thing I loved too was my letterer, Dave Sharp. I asked him, I was like, okay, if a kid today was writing a journal, like keeping track of stuff she was doing, she wouldn't necessarily have a paper journal. She wouldn't have like a book. I was like, she probably
like a tablet or something.
A tablet. So I said, can you make it look like she's typing this out on a tablet? And that's what he did with the narration boxes. He made it look like it's
yeah, they do. They look like message windows or something you need to edit, like a text box.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really cool. And then one thing that was cool too, and you see it in the second page there, in the first Kickstarter we had where you could do the reward where you could actually be in the issue. And her judo student that you see there that she's waving goodbye to was one of the backers wanted his daughter in there. So I made her she did karate and stuff like that. So I put her in this her gi and everything. And
that's awesome.
That's cool.
And now there was a few people that did that. And now those are like reoccurring characters in my story. Like that character Elena appears in issue 2 and she appears in issue 3. And it's just like she's now a full-fledged
just part of the universe now.
Right. And I
that's awesome. So it's not just like a little one-off, like, oh, your name's on a billboard somewhere in the background or
right, exactly. And that was another thing that was helpful for me too, because I wanted to show that she knew how to fight, that Stealthhammer knew how to fight, Jamie knew how to fight.
So there's a reason she's not scared to actually fight.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I always hated it when like you read a comic book, someone gets superpowers, and all of a sudden they magically know like kung fu. It's like it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That does bother me too. It's
True.
like, come on, like.
So
that's why I liked Spider-Man as a kid, because he
Right.
just got his butt whooped
Yes.
all the time. Like
Yeah, so
he
we
had to
established-
figure it out.
Yeah. So we established here that she's not only good at like judo and stuff like that, but she's good enough to train other kids. So like that's my way of establishing it without saying a word. Like it was just basically like, okay, she came out and she's saying bye to one of her students, and like we now know
Obviously,
she
knows
fight.
martial arts.
Right,
Like,
right. So and that doesn't mean she can't be beaten. She gets smacked around a little
just
bit.
knows how to handle it.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
she knows how to hold her own. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and then like she has a tagline, because any good hero needs a tagline, and her tagline is "That's not how this story ends," and that's a real life line that my wife has used in life. Like,
Wow.
it's that whole like you don't give up. Like someone said to her one time, like, "Oh, it's too late to do that." And she's like, "Nope, that's not how the story ends. Come on, let's go." And like, so I use that as a real
I
life
love
tagline.
it.
That's awesome, man.
I think I'm gonna have to steal that.
That's awesome. Oh man, the uncle.
Oh yeah, you got to have an evil uncle.
It's always an evil uncle.
Yes.
I love it.
And there's a reason why he is the way that he is. We get a little hint of it at the end of the issue when he basically starts going a little insane and everything else. But we will see him again. We see him in issue 2. We will see him again in the future as well. I had lots of plans for him, but we also find out like why he's willing to turn on his own family eventually. So you have to have proper motivation for things. But you can see right away she has the hero instinct in that page too. Like
Yeah.
things are going off, and
She pushes Kyle out the way.
Pushes Kyle, she gets tripped. We find out in issue 3 why she got tripped, because if you notice, there's a little string there. So that plays a factor in issue 3. So that's one thing to mention too. Is in issue 1, we get her origin, and you can see right there she's like disappearing. She's got power. She doesn't know what happened. She basically blacks out, and so we get that whole origin in issue 1. In issue 2, we learn about her legacy. So we learned about her origin 1. In issue 2, we learn about her legacy. We find out that she's from a long family of guardians, and that there's dark forces out there. And Ari the elf has basically been sent to make sure that she becomes the hero she needs to become. And he kind of lays out the history of the family.
Like a Jiminy Cricket character.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, I'm taking you to Iceland. That's where, origin of my life came from. So it just seemed like being there, it seemed like such a perfect place for something magical to happen. I was like, okay, this is where they're going to go. So yeah.
Is this what this full page spread was from?
So this is the first page of the 3rd issue.
I was saying, because that's all you sent me of issue 3.
Yeah.
Is literally this. So.
So this is another one of those one page, a lot of stuff is happening.
I love stuff like this though, because it makes you actually want to look at everything and see if you can find everything.
Yes. So this is the elf village that Ari comes from. And at the beginning of this story of issue 3, we find out. So issue 3 is a flashback story of how Ari the elf was sent, why he was sent, and like we see a lot of things we saw in issue 1 and 2 from Ari the elf's perspective.
Oh, let's go. Sign me up.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
So there's things like we get to actually meet the bus driver. If you remember, Jamie stopped the bus when she missed it and everything else. We get to actually meet the bus driver because Ari meets the bus driver. We get to see in issue 2 that same judo student, Elena. She was in a police station, and she's telling a police officer about I was dealing with these muggers, and all of a sudden this little gnome guy came out. Well, in issue 3, we get to see her and Ari deal with those muggers. So
okay.
So there's a lot of things. I was asked one time, well, how come her dad wasn't home when they got home? Because she was introducing her boyfriend. And I was like, there's a reason. Well, issue 3, we find out the reason why her dad wasn't home. So So it's like there's always a reason. I like to refer to my writing as Claremontian, after Chris Claremont, because he was always known for putting these little nuggets in there. that he would revisit later. So,
Yes.
so that's what I like.
And
to
it
know.
might take him a while to revisit them, but he
Oh yeah,
would.
yeah.
He would. He would
Some of mine are going to
revisit
take a while to revisit too, but we're going to get there.
I love it.
Well,
Like one of
there's
the
not enough of that long-term storytelling anymore,
Yeah.
though.
Well, and that's the thing too. I've always heard like, because of course I don't do what I'm told I'm supposed to do. Like I always heard like, oh, if you're getting into comics, do like a one shot or do a short mini series just to show you can do. Don't do that big epic story. And I was like, I'm doing a big epic story.
I was at the end of the day, do
Yeah.
what you want, and it will find an audience. Like maybe
Exactly.
not right away, but
Yeah.
Because what
Yeah,
you're interested in, someone else is interested in it, and
Oh
they
yeah.
will support it.
Yeah. So, and I found an amazing team of people to work on this. Joel Jackson's actually down from your area of the woods. He's from Columbus.
oh, okay.
So he's from down there, and Heather Breckel, who's the colorist for issue 3, she's from Columbus as well. So
Okay.
we got the whole Ohio contingency going on there.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
but yeah, then I've had Dave Sharp. He's our letterer. He's been our letterer for all 3 issues. He is a veteran in the industry. Like if you know lettering at all, you've come across Dave Sharp's name. He's worked at Marvel, DC, all of them. And it's funny too because I've had interviews where people go like, "How'd you get Dave Sharp?" I'm like, I asked him and I paid him.
I was just like, people ask me sometimes like, how do we find guests? We're like, well, we just tell everybody we are willing to interview comic book creators, and they kind of just send
Show
us
up.
emails.
Man.
But yeah, so and then our colorist for the first issue was Ross Hughes, who's a veteran. He worked on like Justice League and Green Lantern and stuff like that. Issue 2, I had 2 colorists, and it was just we ended up having 2 because my initial colorist got overwhelmed with a lot of work, and that was Chris Sotomayor. He's an amazing guy. I've known him for years, but he works on like big name stuff like Batman and Spider-Man and stuff like that. And he's like, yeah, I'll do your issue. And then he did like the first 4 pages and the cover coloring, and then he found out he had just too much lined up, and he apologized but I was like, and you have to take the work that you can get. Like mine's not consistent work, so I appreciate what he did. So then we got Luis Delgado. I found him on Instagram, and he did the coloring for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin.
Okay.
So,
I was gonna say I know that name.
Yeah.
So we got him on there, and then and then like I said, he had way too much when this project became available. So I found Heather Breckel. She was recommended me by Joel, my artist, and she's worked on like My Little Pony and Rise of the TMNT comics and things like that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool.
So
I'll have to look up her stuff.
And that's something with that whole like because a lot of those are 80s cartoon type properties, so it kind of sticks in the vibe. I like that.
Exactly. And then we've had amazing variant cover artists. Some of them I've known for years from doing the podcast that I mentioned earlier. So like Robert Atkins did the variant cover for the first issue. That's the one that's right over there. Yep, you got it up on the screen there. So
cover on the right, correct?
Yes, correct. And he's worked on like G.I. Joe for IDW. He's done a couple of Spider-Man issues. He's done Villains for Hire, things like that. And then for issue 2, I had Chrissy Zullo, who is an amazing artist. She had some of her artwork, and again, that's the one that's on the right there. I reached out to her because I've been a fan of hers for a while, and it's one of those things like you have your list of people like I would love to work with this person, and she was right near the top of the list for this because her artwork works so well for it. And
100%. It screams like young adult or all ages crowd.
And she's had DC statues done of her artwork, and then she did a whole bunch not that long ago, a whole bunch of Marvel variant covers. And that was again
I know exactly what you're talking about now. Yep.
Yeah. And that was another one where people were like, how did you get her? And I was like, I emailed her and offered to pay her right before Marvel got her.
That's the key, is right before Marvel got a hold of her.
So then for issue 3, we have another artist that I love his work, Chris Uminga, and he is the husband of Chrissy Zullo. So I was able to just reach out to her and say, hey, you did issue 2. You think your husband would be interested in doing issue 3? And Chris has done artwork for, he also had these statues of his artwork done in DC characters, and then he's done a lot of artwork for like Disney stuff. So so he worked out perfectly. He did a beautiful cover. But I'm someone that I want to pack issues with as much stuff for someone to see and read and everything else as possible. So we always have a back cover artist as well. So issue 1 had Shannon Gallant, who did the back cover, and he is the longest running artist on G.I. Joe Real American Hero.
I do not have the back covers.
No, that's okay. That's all right. But he's the longest
artist. Expecting those to pop up on the screen right now. I do not have those.
But yeah, he's the longest running artist on G.I. Joe Real American Hero. I've known him because of the podcast. Issue 2, I had Scott Kruger, who's done a few variant covers for like Star Wars Adventures. And then this issue, we have Brian Shearer, who has worked on G.I. Joe. He's worked on Transformers, and he's had some of his own indie projects. So yeah, it was just like, how much artwork can I show? And I always love the fact that I can show these characters in different people's style, but it all works, like, because they all have like this consistent.
Right. No, that's awesome.
No, this is amazing. I actually I wrote a whole bunch of notes with things and so one thing I really I can dig, and I can tell this is going to be something really cool later on. It's just her. I do want to see more of her relationship with Kyle.
Yeah,
because it's kind of reminding me of Kim Possible and Ron Stoppable.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we haven't had a couple duo kind of like that in a while.
Yeah.
You know, especially where you have the woman in the relationship is the more headstrong, the leader.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, look, she grabs him by his collar and is just like, come on, let's go.
Yeah. And I feel like we just haven't had that relationship archetype in a while. So that was actually pretty refreshing.
Yeah, I actually told Joel what I wanted. I wanted somebody in that scene in particular. I was like, go with a Looney Tunes thing where she grabs him by the back of the jacket and just yanks him, and he's like, yoink, So.
Well, he nailed it.
That was awesome. Yeah, definitely nailed. I love the which I can already tell is going to become a running gag. The angry neighbor.
Yes.
Who's mad
God,
at the father.
Can you really blame him on a certain level?
Right? No, not at all. I don't.
They did blow
all.
up half his house 5 years ago,
right,
so it's understandable. He feels his house shake. He starts to get upset.
Yeah, Mr. Fredericks, I understand you.
Yes. So Mr. Fredericks, what I was going for with him was I was going for Carl Winslow from Family Matters.
Okay.
And Mr. Wilson from Dennis the Menace, who's always angry at the neighbor and stuff like that. You said, he's justified. He's absolutely justified. But I wanted that type of character that's going to have a heart of gold, but is angry, but still
he's a good person.
He just
does not like the next door neighbors.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So we'll learn more about him. He will absolutely be a reoccurring character. We'll get to see some of that heart of gold from him and things like that. So yeah.
Cool. Because he gave me that J. Jonah Jameson just a hater.
But when push comes to shove, J. Jonah Jameson does usually do the right thing.
Exactly.
He's covered for Peter Parker when he thought he was going to get killed. J. Jonah Jameson may be an asshole, but he's our asshole. And
we will, and this isn't a spoiler at all, but we haven't uncovered this yet, but we will find out that he was a retired police officer. So that's why he was able to get the cops there so quickly.
Carl
took
Winslow.
him no time to get them there.
Right. So and they kind of just humor him because they've been out there a few times. Because of course, anytime his house shakes, he's calling his buddies to come down and check it out and stuff. So yeah,
makes sense.
No, and just the art style for the whole thing in general is just. I love it because it makes you feel like you're watching an old 80s or early 90s cartoon.
Yeah. And Joel Jackson is my artist. Like I say, he's down there in Columbus. He is incredible. Found him through mutual acquaintances that my wife had, and he packs a lot into a page, but not in a bad way. In a way that like you were saying earlier, it makes you want to look at the page longer. And I was looking for someone who could do this cartoony style that, like you said, you could see on Saturday morning cartoons or something like that,
100%.
but also could do like this detail, because I knew I was going to be packing details in there. And like, so give you an idea, for our Kickstarter, we have a print. It's going to be exclusive to the Kickstarter. There's only be 50 of them made. The reason I mention it is right now is because I went to Joel and said, for this print, I want an epic battle scene. Here's all the good guy characters, here's all the bad guy characters. And what I want this scene like from Rocky 3, where at the end, where Apollo and Rocky were just like, they're about to spar with each other and they're going to throw that first punch at each other and they just like freeze frames. That's what I want. I want the good guys and the bad guys just about to throw down and then it freezes. And that's the image I want. And he went to town. And he sent me a picture literally today showing the inked image. And I'm like, this is insane. And it's going to be fully colored. It's just how much he packs in there is unreal. It reminds me a lot of like George Perez, where it's like there's so much in there, but you can tell all of it. It's all distinct.
Nothing feels forced onto the page.
No.
Like it's no wasted space is what I would say. Like it's not that it's so much going on. It's just he didn't waste any of the page.
No.
Yeah.
Like with these, and we always have every issue. We always have a page. First page always is pretty big with a lot of stuff going on. The last page is always a big page with a lot of stuff going on. So I want people. They always say you should start big and end big, or start strong and end strong. Like I want that where it's like someone opens that first page and they're just like they're in that world and then they read that last page and they're like, okay, and now I want more.
Yeah.
So, right. Yeah.
Well, it's definitely the effect it had on me, at least, because a lot of people try to do new superheroes or whatever, but very few of them are able to make them feel unique and new. And this one does feel unique and new. Like it's not just super strength, or it's not just another super speedster, or we've got 1,000 speedsters, we've got 1,000 super strong people. Like,
and that was the thing too. I wanted to make it so. Of course, you have the name Stealth Hammer, so it's like, well, what are the powers going to be? Because that's two things that don't go together. You never hear of a hammer being stealthy, so,
right?
So that's where I was like, okay, well, she has fists like sledgehammers. Obviously, to get that power up type look to them and everything else. And then I was like, okay, she can turn invisible. What if she can't control that? Like what if so she needs some help with that. Right. And so it's just like she's getting thrusted in this world. And that's the thing too, like she has that don't give up attitude, and I had someone say, well, she's a little too perky for me. And I'm like, you do understand she's going on a hero's quest. I'm gonna put her through the ringer. Don't worry. Like she's
right. It's just the first issue.
I get it. Yeah.
Right, like she's gonna go through trials and she's gonna go through tribulations,
and I'm sure there's gonna be character development along all that
route. Right. So I have it at the very least the first 6 issues pretty much mapped out, and it's like this issue's a flashback. We see Ari the Elf and his journey there, which is a lot of fun. Issue 4, we're gonna get into more of the ongoing story. She arrives in Iceland. That was another thing too. Was issue 2, we ended on a cliffhanger because Kyle shows up and it ain't Kyle. And my wife was like, I don't like how you ended that. And I was like, why? She goes, it makes me uncomfortable. I was like, good, because then it makes the reader uncomfortable too. So,
right.
And I was like, I got news for you. We don't resolve it in issue 3.
Man, so you gotta wait a whole.
You gotta wait a whole nother issue. But my thought behind it was like, again, much like the superpower, or much like someone getting superpowers and fighting, and no explanation. In this case, I wanted her to go to Iceland, but I wanted a passage of time. So I didn't want it to just be like issue 3. Oh, here we're in Iceland. Here we go. So I was like, okay, good opportunity to do a flashback story of how Ari got there, and we get to learn more about this world because of it. And so it's like issue 4 is going to be more about her adventure in Iceland, starting to head towards the goddess Aurora. Issue 5 is when we explore her grandmother, and we get another flashback story, except this time it's her reading her grandmother's journal, which we got to see in issue 2. And so we get to actually like it's one of those things like the campfire scene where she's going to be sitting at a campfire, watch the robots powering down. Are the elves going to sleep? So she decides it's a good time to read her grandmother's journal. She reads about one of her grandmother's earliest adventures. And so we get a little flashback. We learn more about this grandmother that disappeared 5 years ago.
Looks exactly like her.
Yes.
Like that's
Yeah.
I was like, that's gonna have to come up at some
Yes.
point. Like guaranteed. Like
Yeah.
they look too similar. Like to not make that a plot point at some point.
Yeah. So it is her grandmother, and the cool thing about it too was that the grandmother's name it goes by the nickname Patsy Sunshine. We find out that she also has superpowers, and which we found out in issue 2. And she is based on my mother-in-law, who sadly passed away last year, but she did get to see herself characterized as Patsy
That's
Sunshine, this
awesome.
character.
That's awesome.
And that was her real life nickname, was Patsy Sunshine. So I was like, okay, how do I work with that? Again, like Stealth Hammer, how do I make that work? What do her powers end up being and stuff like that? So so we play with that. She's kind of like my Indiana Jones type character.
Yeah, we're being an archaeologist.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna have some fun with that. We're finally in issue 5 gonna be introduced to the Tokalosh, which are all these little demon character, gremlin looking characters that you see on the covers and the pinups and everything else. We're going to learn about them in issue 5. Issue 6 is her finally reaching the Council of Elders, and we have a couple more fun twists to throw in there. So the first 6 issues are really like mapped out for a nice story arc where at the end of it, people will be like, okay, yeah, there's got to be a lot more of this.
Yeah, no,
This is awesome.
even like before we had started this episode, I was talking to JJ. We were just talking, and I was like, "Hey, man, I feel like something big is gonna happen with this. Like,
Yeah.
I know it because I was like the second issue. We slowed things down a little bit more, started
Yeah.
to explore more of the world. I was
Yeah.
like, there's gonna be some big things down the corner,
Yeah.
man.
And you want to talk about a fan of world building?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
he
Yeah.
loves a slow
Yeah.
burn with his
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh man, yes, that's
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Again, Jim Henson and all that type of stuff, like Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland. I love starting off with a character and then just kind of building this world. And as you keep going, you get introduced to more and more. And by the time you're done, it's this huge world.
And you're
you-
exhausted.
Yeah, and you know all of it because you've been introduced to it
Yes.
slowly. It's not like, oh, I don't remember who these characters are. Like,
That's one problem I have with a lot of Marvel and DC stuff when they start using like a lot of side characters
Yeah.
or like even
Mhm.
just using outside heroes for like a particular scene and they come back later and they're talking about something that they did in a previous issue.
Yeah.
I'm like, when did that like I don't remember them coming up
yeah.
because it all happens so fast with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in our first Kickstarter, we did. My wife and I worked on this nice hardcover book, which was a behind-the-scenes book.
Oh, cool.
And it's like my Bible because there's like certain things that I put in here to help remind me of different things.
Like reference notes and stuff.
Right. So to give you an idea, there was a one that collaborating with other creators like artists and stuff like that is just such an awesome thing because it helps tell the story. So like give you an example, Joel was drawing Dr. Everett, her dad, and he drew this, sent me a little sketch with this like little robot on his shoulder. And I was just like, oh, I like that robot. And he goes, yeah, I figured he'd be like this absent-minded type professor that you were explaining. So like he would probably have these little robot assistants that help him. I'm like, yeah, I really like that. Go with that. Well, then I get issue 1's cover and he drew 8 of them. And I texted him and I was like, Joel, for me as a writer, I have to name all these characters now. And they all have personalities. They all have to have some type of function. You can't just throw them on the cover and be like, oh, these are just robots that are there. I'm like, no, they have to have some meaning and reason. So, but it ended up being the happiest thing in the world because now I had more characters to play with and more characters to
Right.
Yeah.
and so I have a page in here that has, it's my Bible, all 8 characters, what their names are, what their specialties are, all that.
What they look like so you don't
Right.
forget which is which.
Right,
Like
exactly. So yeah, so it just happened to being, and you see they're called the Labites. So they're, that was a nod to a comic series of someone that I knew that passed away. He was a comic creator named Jeremy Dale. He did a comic series called Skyward, which was this fantasy type story, all ages. It was absolutely amazing, and he had these characters.
I've read some of it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't read all of it, but I've read some of it.
Yeah. And he had these characters called the Rabbites, which were like these warrior rabbits. And I was like, to honor him, I'm calling my characters the Labites. And they're
That's
the little
awesome.
robot characters. So yeah.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome. One thing, since we are talking about the dad,
Yeah.
one thing I really liked was his little guy in the chair name, Toolbox.
Toolbox, yeah.
Because it reminded me, it's so funny because this is like totally two different like genres or styles, but it reminded me of Punisher's guy in the chair,
yeah.
Micro.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh my gosh, yeah.
And I also thought like, okay, he's Toolbox because like like kids always think their parents are tools. So like I was playing off of that a little bit. So
I also
yeah,
like
no, that was the whole idea.
especially like going back to like the 80s and 90s cartoon vibe of it. I love how quickly her dad went from "it's too dangerous" to "here's all the gear I made for this exact situation."
Yes.
Like, all right, well, I'm not gonna be able to stop you. So like you
just have all this stuff that I already had mysteriously ready to go for you that happens to fit perfectly.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
I could definitely see issue 1 or even like any of these issues. I could definitely see them being little 22-minute episodes of a Saturday morning cartoon, you know.
Oh, I'm ready for Netflix to contact me because I need like an 8-episode animated series.
Oh, 100%. That's just for the pilot season though.
Right. Oh yeah. For sure.
You know, if some places have a pilot episode, you're gonna have a pilot season because it needs that.
Exactly. But yeah, no, I have like I get people sometimes will ask me like, so what's the dream? I'm like, well, the hope, the realistic hope is that people get the comic and they enjoy it. And that's really what I want. And that means when I hear stories of people that read it, especially those that don't owe me anything, like they're not like my close friends or something like that, and they tell me like how much they really enjoyed it, that means the world to me. Now, if you want to ask me what the dream is the Netflix series, the action figures, the everything.
I mean, yeah, of course.
Like I'm not humble. I mean, I'm humble, but I'm not that humble where it's like no, give me the big deal. Like I want this out there, and like there would be nothing cooler than to walk into like a Target and see a Stealth Hammer action figure on the peg. So
right, but it's also one of those things. Like if it doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world as long as somebody out there is getting to enjoy this stuff.
Yeah, I had someone ask me one time, like, do you consider yourself successful? I was like, I created a comic book. It's something I always wanted to do. So
I would say, yeah, that's a success right there.
Right. That's
not a lot of people get to that stage, you know.
No, and thankfully I've had very supportive friends. I had one friend that said to me, he's like, you've created 2 more comic books than I have ever done. So
right, 100%. Like we're just 2 jackasses that sit here and talk to people who make comic books.
But hey, that's how it started for me. So
right, so you never know what the future holds. But
hey, you never know. 10 years down the line, me and JJ were gonna be like, hey man.
Right, like you never know.
Let's do this.
It's one of those things where I just wanted to start talking to the people that made the stuff I liked to read.
Yeah,
like that's literally how that's just it. Like, and if it happens to blow up and we become like big famous podcasters or whatever, that'd be awesome. But if that doesn't happen, that's cool too because this is still fun. Like
it is.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like from doing the podcast, I can totally relate to that because from doing the podcast, like one of the biggest, most awesome benefits out of it was the friendships I made out of it.
Oh, 100%. Like we're still on pretty close terms with most of our former guests. Like,
and that's how I like it because it's like you create this community and everything else. But when I started off, it was just I just want to talk about these '80s properties with my friend, and we'll just see if someone listens.
And what we have learned, people do
sometimes how you got to start off.
Yeah. But now I have friends all over the country that like I literally text almost every day with, and like I wouldn't know them if I hadn't put myself out there.
I said we wouldn't know each other if it wasn't for TikTok. He lives in Mississippi. I'm in Ohio. Like I've never met him in person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We've known each other for like 4 years.
I met one of my listeners just this past September at Baltimore Comic Con. He flew in from Canada, and we have been like texting, and we've talked on the phone, and I've had him on the show and stuff like that for like 9.5 years, and like probably longer than that. And he's like, Like it took us like what 10 years to actually meet face to face.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Be like that.
Well, shoot, some of your biggest supporters are going to be people on the internet you've never met.
yeah,
Like-
exactly. So,
That is definitely
but
true.
But on that note, before we let you get out of here and enjoy the rest of your evening, is there anything else you want to plug? Is there any other projects you guys got coming up, or
no,
any
so
convention appearances since it is that time of year?
yeah, so a couple interesting things. One is I have like a last minute in Ohio, Lakewood. Like this Saturday, I'm actually appearing at like a little. They're doing like they're calling it an adult scholastic book fair at this place called Mahal's in Lakewood.
An
And
adult scholastic book fair. You'll have to send me some pictures from that.
yeah, for sure, for
That
sure.
just sounds. That doesn't compute in my head, really.
It's basically to take you back to the days of scholastic book fairs when you were a kid.
Right.
So they had a table that opened up. I was like, I'll be there. It'll be cool. It was a different audience, so we'll see what it's like.
Right. There you go.
But I'm not doing any other like appearances or conventions other than one of the things that I'm doing that is really fun, and it was a side thing that came out of doing the comic and everything, was I'm starting to do some public speaking engagements about storytelling and comic book creating and like how to create characters.
Okay.
So I just recently, like about a month ago, presented to 800 grade school kids and talked about that. On the 30th of April, I'm going to be at Westlake Public Library here in Northeast Ohio area, and I'm going to be presenting that same presentation. Not nearly as many people as 800, but it'll be awesome. And then in August, I'm going to be doing it in my hometown of Strongsville. I'm going to be presenting to at the local library as well. So this whole thing has started turning into like being an ambassador of comics as well as creating my own comics. So
That's awesome. Out of curiosity, have you ever spoken with Jay Callagayan of Cartoon Crossroads Columbus?
no, I have not.
I'll have to shoot you his Instagram or something so you can get in touch with him, because he runs a free independent comic book convention that's 4 days long here in Columbus.
Oh, awesome.
And the first 2 days are all like talk and teach lectures and panels and
cool.
stuff. And it's all indie comic books and cartoonists.
That's
so
awesome. That's very cool. Yeah,
I'll have to link you guys up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so we're doing that, and then we've got the Kickstarter for issue 3 going on right now. It's going until May 7th.
And if you'd like to back Stealth Hammer issue number 3, you can scan the QR code right there on your screen, or find the description. Go into the description of this video or episode if you're listening on Spotify or somewhere else, and there will be a link in the description as well.
Yes, thank you. And not only is issue 3 available, but you can get issues 1 and 2, and you can get any of the covers. We have a lot of awesome rewards. One of my favorite rewards that for me personally is we have one reward level where you can get the original script. And it's not just,
that's cool.
Yeah, it's not just, here's the script and I sign it and so that. But what I do is I go back into the script and I add little notes in the margins of what I was trying to do. If there's any little stories that go along with what was on that page and stuff like that. It's that behind the scenes director's cut of the script.
That's cool.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Because that's something we don't get from comic book creators very often, is the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah. And so, and the script obviously is always written towards my creators. So it's always interesting for someone to kind of read, like, what was I communicating to them? And
right.
But then, like I said, I go into the margins and actually like add little notes and everything else, really detailed stuff. So that I'm really excited about. And like I said, I'm super excited about this print that we're doing because it's limited, but oh my God, the art on it is just blowing my mind. So like if you've liked any of the stuff that you've seen on the screen here, multiply it by 10, and that's like the level of amazingness that's happening on this special print that we're doing.
Oh, I love it. And if you guys want to pick up copies of issue 1 and 2, you can find that on the Stealth Hammer website. Again, you can scan the QR code right there on the screen, or if you're listening audio, you can go down into the description of the video or the audio version and find the links there as well. And if you would like to help support our show, help us support the independent comic book community and help it grow, you can head over to our merch store, buy a t-shirt, buy a hoodie. We got stickers. We got all kinds of stuff, all kinds of little goodies for you there. My name is JJ. His name is Michael. His name is Ryan Drost. I pronounced it correctly again. And we will see you guys next week. So please take it easy. And see y'all later.